The girl who only watched the sun hung low over the alien town, casting long shadows across the cracked ground. The air smelled faintly of dust and cooking fires. Somewhere near the center of the settlement, laughter echoed, the bright, happy sound of children playing. Their voices rose and fell with each bounce of the ball, a worn sphere patched in many places. On the far edge of the open field sat a small alien girl. Her name was Lyra, though almost no one called her by it. She sat with her back against a crooked post, arms wrapped around her knees. Her thin frame was wrapped in an old brown shawl. Her dark hair hung over her eyes, hiding the way they followed every movement of the game, every time the ball flew high into the air. Lyra's eyes lit up for a moment. It was like she forgot where she was, like she could almost feel herself running toward it. But the moment passed quickly. Her gaze would drop to the dusty ground, to the empty space where her left leg should have been. The pant leg was folded neatly and tied, a permanent reminder of what she had lost. The other children never asked her to join. Some pretended not to notice her. Others whispered things when they thought she couldn't hear. Words like broken and slow, words that sank deep and stayed there at the edge of the crowd. A man stood watching. He was human, new to this part of the galaxy. He had arrived only a week ago, carrying little more than a bag and a contract for work in the town. He didn't know anyone, and no one knew him. But as he stood there, his eyes kept drifting to the girl who never moved. Something about her silence unsettled him. It wasn't the silence of someone shy. It was the silence of someone who had been left out for so long that she had stopped expecting anything else. He noticed the way her fingers dug into the dirt when the ball rolled close, how she froze every time it bounced in her direction, and how, each time, another child would grab it first without looking her way. The human's name was Daniel. He had seen hardship before. He had served in rough colonies, walked streets where people had nothing. But there was something about this girl that felt different. It wasn't just poverty or injury. It was the way the world had decided she would never matter, and she had quietly accepted it. The game went on, and the sun began to dip lower. The sky turned orange and gold. The dust kicked up by the children's feet hung in the air. Lyra's face was half lit, half shadowed. The human found himself wondering how long she had been like this. Had she once run with the others, laughing and shouting before her leg was gone? Or had her whole life been like this, watching, never joining? The ball bounced hard against a wall and rolled toward her. For the first time all afternoon, the children looked at her. She stared at the ball, inches from her hand. Her heart pounded. She reached out slow, hesitant, but before her fingers touched it, a boy rushed over, grabbed it, and ran back without a word. Lyra lowered her hand, hiding it in her shawl. Her head bowed, as if she could make herself invisible. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew the look in her eyes. A look he had seen in wounded soldiers, in starving refugees, in people who had been told they were less. He shifted the weight of his bag and turned away. But after a few steps, he stopped. The sound of the children's laughter faded behind him, but the image of the girl stayed in his mind that night in the small room he rented above a repair shop. Daniel couldn't sleep. The noise of the settlement outside came and went. Traders shouting, machines rumbling, music from a nearby stall, but in his head, all he could hear was the quiet, heavy silence that had surrounded Lyra. He thought of her watching that ball as if it held the whole world inside it, and of the way her shoulders sank when it was taken away. He told himself it was none of his business. He was just passing through. He didn't know her, didn't know her family, didn't know what had happened to her. But even as he tried to push her from his mind, a thought kept returning. Maybe, for her, nothing had ever changed. Maybe no one had ever stepped in, ever asked what she wanted, ever tried to make it better. The moonlight through the cracked window cut across the floor. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, somewhere in the distance. A ball thudded against the ground, followed by faint laughter. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of a decision he didn't even know he was making yet. By morning, he still didn't have an answer. But one thing was certain. He would go back to that field. And this time, he wouldn't just walk away. Asterisk the past, she never. Spoke of Daniel returned to the field the next day. The air was cool, and the ground still held the faint smell of last night's rain. The children were playing again, splashing through small puddles as the ball skipped and rolled. But Lyra was in the same place, sitting against the crooked post. Her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. This time, Daniel didn't stand at a distance. He walked over slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. She looked up at him for a moment, her eyes cautious, then looked away, pretending to be interested in the dirt at her feet. "Hi," he said quietly. She didn't answer. He tried again. "My name's Daniel." She gave a small nod, but kept her gaze down. He didn't push her for words. Instead, he crouched beside her, watching the game in silence. After a while, he asked gently, "Why don't you play with them?" Her shoulders stiffened, and for a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it, she said, "I can't run." Daniel glanced at her empty pant leg. He had guessed as much. But the way she said it was different, not just as a fact, but as a sentence, like a life she had already accepted. They sat in silence for a bit longer before she added, "They don't want me there anyway." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to ask more, but he knew pushing too soon would make her close up completely. So instead, he said, "Can I walk you home?" She shook her head quickly. No. The answer was sharp, almost panicked. It told him more than any story could. Whoever she lived with, it wasn't a place she wanted anyone to see. That night, Daniel started asking around in the market. He didn't use her name at first, just described a young girl. Thin, dark hair, missing a leg. Most shrugged, some shook their heads. But one old woman, selling roasted roots from a cart, gave him a long look. "You mean Lyra," she said at last. Her parents died in a factory collapse years ago. She was with them. That's when she lost her leg. Daniel listened quietly. The woman went on. Her father pulled her out from under the rubble, but he was already dying. Her mother didn't make it. She shook her head. The girl was sent to her mother's sister, but they were poor too, and they had their own children. He understood the rest without her saying it. In households like that, the one who needed the most was often given the least. The woman's voice dropped. "There are prosthetic legs, but they're expensive. Even the cheapest would cost more than her aunt makes in a year, and no one's going to spend that much on a girl who can't work." "Not here." Daniel thanked her and walked away. His mind felt heavy. He had seen poverty before, but something about Lyra's story made it sharper. Maybe it was because she was still just a child. Maybe because he had seen that spark in her eyes. A spark trapped behind chains she didn't put on herself. The next day, he found her again. This time, he brought a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. He sat beside her and handed it over without a word. She hesitated before taking it. But when she did, she ate in small, quick bites, like someone used to food disappearing if she didn't finish fast enough. When she was done, Daniel asked, "Do you remember running before?" "Everything." Her face softened, and for the first time, she met his eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I used to be the fastest." He smiled gently. "I believe it." Her gaze dropped again. "But now, I'm nothing." Daniel leaned forward. "You're not nothing, Lyra." She didn't answer. But her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her shawl, as if his words had reached somewhere she didn't want to show. Later that evening, as Daniel walked back to his room, he thought about what the old woman had said. He thought about the prosthetic legs, about the cost, and about how no one was even trying. Everyone had already decided Lyra's future, and she was just living in the shadow of that decision. The thought burned in his mind until he found himself saying it aloud. It doesn't have to stay this way. From that moment, a quiet determination began to take root in him. He didn't have a plan yet, didn't know how to get what she needed. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to be just another person who watched her and walked away. He had seen too many people left behind, and he knew how it ended. The world kept moving, and they faded until they were forgotten. But something inside him refused to let that happen to her. And deep down, he suspected that if he could give her even one real chance to run again, it would change everything. Not just for her, but for him too. A decision in the rains of weather on the alien world had been strange all week. Hot winds in the morning, heavy clouds by noon. By the time evening came, the sky was dark and heavy, and rain began to fall in slow. Cold drops. Daniel was finishing his shift at the repair yard when he noticed the rain turning into a steady downpour. The streets quickly filled with puddles. Traders covered their stalls with plastic sheets. People hurried inside. No one wanted to be out in this weather. But as Daniel made his way back to his small rented room, he saw a small figure sitting on the edge of the field. Even though the ball game had long ended, the other children were gone. The streets were almost empty. It was Lyra. She sat alone on the damp ground, her shawl already soaked through. Rainwater ran down her hair and dripped onto her face. She didn't seem to notice. Her arms were wrapped around something small and round. Daniel walked closer. "Lyra?" he called. His voice was half lost under the sound of the rain. She looked up, blinking through wet lashes, and he saw what she was holding, an old ball. Ripped along one side, barely holding its shape, he knelt beside her. "Why are you out here?" Her voice was soft, almost drowned out by the rain. "I found it in the trash." Daniel glanced at the ball again. It was worthless to most. The kind of thing a child would throw away without a second thought. But the way Lyra held it, clutching it tightly against her chest, made it clear what it meant to her. "It's the only ball I can have," she added, looking down. "The only one they won't take from me." Something inside Daniel twisted sharply. He looked at her, soaked, shivering, clutching a broken toy like it was treasure, and he felt a wave of anger he couldn't hide, not at her, but at the world that had put her here, at the people who walked past without even noticing. "Come on," he said, standing. "You'll get sick out here." She shook her head. "If I go home, they'll take it." Daniel stared at her for a moment, then crouched again. "What if I keep it for you?" She studied his face for a long time, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she handed it over slowly. Her small fingers lingered on it before letting go. He tucked the ball inside his jacket to keep it dry, then held out his hand. To her, she hesitated, then took it. They walked through the rain together. The streets glistened with reflected lights from the stalls. Rain splashed in shallow puddles with every step. Daniel led her toward the covered steps of an old storage building, where they could shelter for a moment under the awning. She sat on the steps while he shook the water from his hair. He handed her a piece of bread from his pocket. She ate quietly, every bite small and careful. Daniel studied her in the dim light. She was so small, so light. And yet she carried something heavy, the kind of weight that came from being told you were nothing, again and again, until you started to believe it in that moment. Daniel felt something click into place. It wasn't just pity. It wasn't just kindness. It was a decision. He was going to get her a prosthetic leg. He didn't know how. He didn't know where he would find the money or the parts, but he knew it was possible. And once he knew that, there was no going back. He pictured her standing on the field, running after the ball with the others. He imagined the way her eyes would look, no longer watching from the sidelines, but lit with the joy of being part of the game. The thought burned in his chest when the rain slowed to a mist. He walked her as close to her home as she would allow. She stopped at the corner, glancing toward the narrow alley that led to a dimly lit door. "I go alone from here," she said quickly. Daniel nodded, not pressing further. He handed her the ball again, and she held it tight against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Then hurried down the alley, disappearing into the shadows. Daniel stood there for a long moment, listening to the distant drip of water from the rooftops. Then he turned toward his own path. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Rain still tapped lightly against the window. The smell of damp earth filled the air, and the image of Lyra sitting in the rain, clutching that broken ball, refused to leave his mind. He knew he couldn't change the whole world, but he could change hers. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The search for the leg. The next morning, Daniel rose earlier than usual. The town was still waking up. Shopkeepers sweeping the dust from their steps. The smell of frying bread drifting through the streets. He slung his worn bag over his shoulder, but today he wasn't heading to the repair yard. Instead, he went to the marketplace. The stalls were busy even at this hour, packed with traders from nearby settlements. Humans were rare here, and he drew a few curious glances. But Daniel wasn't here to browse. He had a question, and he knew asking it might get strange looks. He stopped at a stall selling machine parts. The vendor, a wide-shouldered alien with rust-colored skin, looked him over. "What are you after, human?" "I need a prosthetic leg," Daniel said simply, "for a young girl." Alien build, light frame. The vendor's eyebrows rose. "You're in the wrong place for that, friend. Those things are expensive. And alien prosthetics, you'd need a specialist. Where can I find one?" Daniel pressed. The vendor leaned on the counter. "You can try the upper district workshops, but—" He glanced at Daniel's patched jacket. "You might not like the prices." Daniel thanked him and moved on. He went from stall to stall, each time asking the same question. Most vendors laughed softly and shook their heads. A few gave him directions, but they all carried the same warning. It would cost more than a laborer like him could ever afford. By midday, Daniel found himself standing outside a metal shop in the upper district. The sign above the door was carved in 2 languages. One of them, human script. Inside, the smell of oil and metal filled the air. An older alien man worked at a bench, magnifying lenses strapped to his head. Daniel waited until the man looked up. "Need something?" "A prosthetic leg," Daniel said. "Custom build for a young alien girl." The man removed his lenses. Studying him for a moment, "I can make one," he said slowly. "But the materials, the adjustments for balance, the fine work. You're looking at least 5,000 credits." Daniel's stomach tightened. He had barely a few hundred saved. "There's no cheaper option." The man shook his head. "You could try the scrapyards for old models, but they'd need repairs, and most won't fit her properly. Could do more harm than good." Daniel thanked him and stepped back into the street. The sun was higher now, the heat making the metal walls of the district shimmer. He walked for a long time, thinking. Every step echoed with the same truth. If he wanted this to happen, he'd have to find another way. In the lower district, he visited the scrap yards. The smell of rust and burned wires hung thick in the air. Piles of broken machines and old parts rose like hills. He asked the workers there about prosthetic limbs. Most shook their heads. But one pointed him toward an old shed near the back. Inside, Daniel found rows of shelves lined with discarded equipment, crutches, braces, and yes, a few old prosthetic legs. Most were too big, too heavy, or the wrong shape entirely. But one, half buried under a tarp, caught his eye. It was smaller than the rest. Clearly designed for a young user, the outer shell was scratched, and one of the joint hinges was missing, but it was light. The problem was obvious. It wasn't made for Lyra's species. The attachment point was completely different. He was about to put it back when a voice came from behind him, looking for something special. Daniel turned to see a thin, wiry alien with bright yellow eyes. The man wore an engineer's vest, his hands covered in grease. "I fix things here," the alien said. "That leg you're holding. I could make it fit her, but I'll need parts, and those parts aren't cheap." Daniel asked how much. The alien smirked. "I don't take credits for everything. Sometimes I trade." It turned out the engineer needed certain mechanical components from restricted areas, things Daniel could get if he took certain jobs. The kind of jobs most avoided, risky ones in unstable buildings and abandoned sites. Daniel weighed the risk, then nodded. "Tell me what you need for the next week." Daniel worked at the repair yard by day and hunted parts by night. He crawled through collapsed storage units, waded through flooded basements, and climbed rusting towers to remove valuable gears, every cut on his hands. Every bruise on his arms reminded him why he was doing this. Each evening, he passed by the field, Lyra, still sitting in her usual spot. Clutching her ball, she didn't know what he was doing, and he didn't tell her. Not yet. Finally. He returned to the shed with a sack full of parts. The engineer's eyes widened. "This will do," he said. "Give me 3 days, Daniel." Left feeling lighter than he had in weeks. For the first time, the impossible felt close enough to touch. Earning the parts the next morning, Daniel woke before sunrise. The air in the town was cool and heavy. The streets quiet except for the distant hum of generators. He strapped his boots tight, slung his bag over his shoulder, and checked the list. The engineer had given him 3 more items were needed to finish Lyra's leg, and every one of them would be hard to get. The first was a set of micro-balance gyros, used in advanced loaders. The only place to find them was an abandoned freight station at the far edge of town. The building had been shut for years after a collapse in one of the storage wings. Daniel reached the station as the sun began to rise. The gates were twisted metal and the walls were scarred with rust. Inside, the air was thick with dust. His footsteps echoed on the cracked floor as he searched through the wreckage. It didn't take long to find the loader's massive machines lying on their sides like fallen beasts. He climbed onto one, pried open the control panel, and began unscrewing the gyro unit. Just as he pulled it free, a sound came from behind him. Footsteps. He turned to see 2 men, not locals, but scavengers, armed with short iron bars. "That's ours," one of them said flatly. Daniel tightened his grip on the gyro. "I found it first." The taller one stepped closer. "Doesn't matter. We take what we want here." Daniel had been in enough rough places to know how this could end slowly. He backed toward the exit. "Not today," he muttered. Then, with a sudden move, he slipped through a gap in the wall and ran. The scavengers shouted and gave chase. But Daniel knew the streets better. He lost them in a narrow alley, his heart pounding as he hid behind a broken vending unit. With the gyro safe in his bag, he moved on to the second item, a flexible joint sleeve, only found in the industrial repair yard near the old power plant. The problem was, the yard was still in use, guarded by workers who didn't like strangers. Poking around, Daniel waited until midday, when the heat made most workers retreat to the shade. Then he slipped inside, moving quickly between stacks of scrap. He found the joint sleeve attached to a half-finished exosuit arm. The bolts were tight, his hands slick with sweat as he worked. Just as he freed it, a voice barked, "Hey!" Daniel didn't look up. He grabbed the sleeve, stuffed it into his bag, and ran. Shouts followed him. Footsteps clanging on the metal walkways. He dove under a low fence and rolled into the tall grass outside. The shouts faded behind him, and he grinned despite the dirt on his face. 2 down, 1 to go. The last item was the hardest. A precision actuator, small but delicate. Stored in the old maintenance tunnels beneath the Eastern District, the tunnels were dark, damp, and full of rats the size of small dogs. People said there were worse things down there too. Daniel lit a small lamp and descended the cracked stairs. The air smelled of mold and stagnant water. His boots splashed as he moved deeper. The walls were lined with rusting pipes, the sound of dripping echoing in the darkness. Halfway in, he heard movement ahead. Slow, heavy movement. He raised the lamp and froze. An alien worker, taller than him and covered in grime, stood in the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly. "You shouldn't be here," it said in a low, gravelly voice. "I just need a part," Daniel replied, keeping his tone calm. The alien tilted its head. "Nothing here is free." Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a wrapped food ration. The alien stared at it for a long moment before taking it. Then, with a nod, it stepped aside, pointing toward a half-collapsed shelf. Daniel found the actuator in a sealed case. The metal was cold in his hands. He slipped it into his bag and hurried back toward the stairs. The alien was gone when he passed the spot again, only the sound of water dripping in the dark. By the time he returned to the engineer's shed, the sun was setting. His clothes were torn. His hands scraped, but the bag was full. The engineer's eyes widened as Daniel placed each part on the workbench. "You actually did it," the alien said, half in disbelief. Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Now make it," the engineer grinned. "Come back in 2 days, and she'll have her leg." Daniel left the shed with sore muscles and a tired smile. The danger, the running, the narrow escapes. It had all been worth it because in 2 days, Lyra's life would change forever. The gift she never expected. 2 days later, the sky was bright and clear. The dust from the streets shimmered in the morning light. Daniel walked through the market with a wrapped bundle in his arms. The weight wasn't heavy, but what it carried made his steps feel heavier than anything he had ever carried before. Inside the bundle was the leg smooth silver alloy, polished. Until it caught the sun, the engineer had done more than repair it. He had reshaped it to match Lyra's frame perfectly, with flexible joints that would move like muscle. The inside was lined with soft padding so it wouldn't rub against her skin. Daniel reached the edge of the open field where Lyra usually sat. The children were playing as always, kicking the ball in bursts of laughter. And there she was, in her usual spot, watching quietly, her ball resting in her lap. She saw him coming and tilted her head. "You're early," she said softly. He smiled but didn't answer right away. Instead, he lowered himself to the ground in front of her and gently placed the bundle between them. "What's that?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Something for you," Daniel replied. His fingers worked at the cloth, unwrapping it slowly, piece by piece, until the polished silver gleamed in the sunlight. Lyra's eyes widened. Her hands hovered above it. Trembling, is that a leg?" Daniel said, his voice gentle. "For you." For a long moment, she didn't move. Her wide eyes darted between the leg and his face. "Why?" she whispered. Daniel met her gaze. "Because you deserve to run again." Her lips parted, but no words came. She reached out slowly, her fingertips brushing the smooth metal like she was afraid it would vanish if she touched it. Then she pulled her hand back as if she didn't believe it was real. "I can't pay you," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "I'm not asking for payment," Daniel replied. "Just a promise that you'll use it." Lyra's throat worked as she swallowed hard. Her eyes shone, and for a moment she looked away, hiding her face in her shawl. Then she nodded. Daniel moved to her side. "We'll need to fit it properly." He spoke softly, explaining how it would attach, how the straps worked, how to lock the joints. She listened without speaking, her hands trembling as she followed his instructions. When it was time, she took a deep breath and let him help. He slid the padded top over the end of her leg, tightening the straps with care. making sure it was snug but not painful. She winced at first, unused to the feeling, but didn't complain. "Now, stand," he said quietly. She hesitated, her fingers digging into the ground. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up, Daniel's hands steadying her. The metal joint bent smoothly under her weight. Supporting her like a real limb, she gasped, her first. Steps were clumsy, each movement slow and uncertain. Daniel stayed close, ready to catch her if she fell. "It's okay," he said gently. "You'll get it." They moved together across the edge of the field. The children noticed and began to slow their game. Their eyes turned toward her, confusion giving way to surprise. Again, Daniel encouraged, letting her take a few steps on her own. She wobbled, nearly lost her balance, but caught herself. A smile, small but real, tugged at her lips, and then, without warning, she laughed. The sound startled even her. A bright, breathless laugh that carried across the field. She turned to Daniel, her eyes shining. "I'm walking, you are," he said, smiling, "and soon you'll be running." She looked at the ball in the children's hands. Her smile grew. "Can I?" Daniel stepped back. "Go, Lyra," took a deep breath, and moved toward them, each step faster than the last. The children parted in surprise as she reached the ball. Her foot swung forward, and the silver leg connected with a satisfying thump. The ball soared across the field. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the children cheered. One of them tossed the ball back to her, and she kicked it again, laughing so hard she nearly lost her balance. Daniel watched from the side, his chest warm. He knew there would still be hard days for her, still people who would whisper. But in this moment, she was no longer the girl who only watched. She was part of the game, and as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the field, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The first step, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep purple. The sounds of the market faded into the background as the field became the center of the evening. Children ran, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. And in the middle of them was Lyra, moving like she had always belonged there. Daniel stood at the edge, his arms crossed loosely, watching. It had been only an hour since she first put on the prosthetic leg. And already she was learning faster than he imagined. Her steps were still uneven, her turns a little too wide, but each movement was more confident than the last. When she kicked the ball and it rolled toward him, he bent down and picked it up. Tossing it back to her, she caught it easily with her foot, balancing in a way that would have been impossible days ago. She laughed, that same bright laugh he had heard earlier, and it made something inside him settle. Like this was the sound he had been waiting to hear. Eventually, the children began to drift home, called by distant voices, one by one. They left the field until it was just Lyra and Daniel. The sky above was streaked with the last light of day, and the air had cooled. She walked toward him slowly. Not because she was tired, but because she seemed to be savoring every step. "Let me play," she said, her voice almost in disbelief. Daniel smiled. "Of course they did." She shook her head. "No, not before, not ever." Her fingers brushed the metal of the leg. "It's like I'm real again." Daniel crouched so he was eye level with her. "You've always been real, Lyra. This just makes it easier for the rest of the world to see it." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment she looked away toward the horizon. "Do you know what the first thing I want to do is?" she asked. "What's that?" He replied, "I want to run all the way to the river," she said. "The one past the east gate. I've never seen it close. I've only heard the water from far away." Daniel chuckled softly. "Then we'll go tomorrow." She blinked. "We?" He nodded. "You didn't think I'd let you go alone, did you?" For a long time, they just stood there in the fading light. The town lights began to flicker on in the distance, glowing against the deepening sky. Somewhere nearby, a trader was singing softly as he closed his stall. Lyra took a few more steps, testing her balance again. Then she looked back at Daniel. "Thank you," she said simply, but in her voice was more than gratitude, it was trust. The kind that doesn't come easily when the world has been cruel. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had given her a leg, yes, but she had given him something too, a reminder of why it mattered to fight for someone, even when it wasn't. Your responsibility. They began walking back toward her home. The streets were quieter now. Only the occasional passerby glancing at them. Some noticed the new leg and stared, but Lyra didn't shrink away like before. She held her head a little higher. When they reached the corner where she always stopped, she paused. "I don't want to hide it," she said, touching the metal. "I don't care if they see." Daniel gave her a small nod. "Good. Let them see." She smiled faintly before stepping into the alley. He watched until she disappeared inside, the sound of her steps even balanced, strong, echoing off the walls. That night, Daniel lay awake in his small room. The sound of rain began to patter softly on the roof. He closed his eyes and pictured her running along the riverbank, her laughter carried on the wind. For the first time in a long time, he felt certain that tomorrow would be better. Not just for her, but for both of them. Because sometimes the first step doesn't just change where you can go, it changes who you are. And for Lyra, that first step had already begun.